Good morning to everyone. Let me to introduce you Nada Alkhayat, Policy Officer, Directorate-general for Health and Food Safety, Unit B6, Medical Devices, European Union. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited well, I would have wished to be there with everyone, but I'm happy to be here and answer a few questions, and hopefully in the future we could be there actually live like we used to.
And we thank you. And let's talk about the application date for MDR. So the first question is, will the postponement of the application date for the MDR also have an impact on the Ivdr? And could the unpredictable duration of the COVID crisis lead to a revision of the times and deadlines, in your opinion?
Thank you for that question. It's not an easy one, certainly. But I think when we're talking about the dates of applications of any regulations, but especially when we're talking about the MDR and Ivdr, it's important to keep in mind when there are two separate pieces of legislation, such as the MDR and Ivdr, these two were agreed upon separately, they were negotiated as such. So because of the postponement of the MDR, we cannot extrapolate this to the Ivdr specifically. As you know, the co-legislators in the midst of COVID-19 in April, they took the difficult decision to postpone the MDR in order to give everyone the opportunity in the sector, from stakeholders such as manufacturers, notified bodies, importers, and distributors, as well as the competent authorities, to really focus their fight against COVID-19 and to ensure that we can ramp up production of critical medical devices. When we're talking about the Ivdr, I think it's important to remind a bit of the very difficult discussions which took place under the negotiations. At the time, the proposal, if my memory serves me right, had a longer transition period for the Ivdr. The date of application was actually further than it currently is. And during the discussions and negotiations, it became very apparent that the co-legislators felt very strongly about having the Ivdr enter into application on the 26th of May, 2022. I think if we just look at COVID-19's impact on the sector itself, it only underlines the importance of, let's say, upgrading our system for IVDs in order to ensure that tests which are being placed on the market, such as COVID-19 tests, are actually safe and performant and up to high standards like we want them to be.
Considering the number of notified bodies and the amount of work, for instance, MDD, MDR certification until May 2021, can bottlenecks be avoided for both regulations, in your opinion, and how are the Commission handling this issue?
Yeah, that's also a very sensitive point. I'm going to guess that next you're going to ask me about Eudamed, but no. These are indeed very, very important points that you're raising. And so for the time being, at least to today, we have 21 notified bodies designated under the two regulations. These have been notified in our database in NANDO, and we expect that 2 more should be published very soon. So in the coming weeks, hopefully an early Christmas present for everyone. And of course, there are more following in the pipeline. But the difficult part about the designation of notified bodies is that you are probably very aware that the regulation is very explicit as regards not only timelines for the designation process itself, but also the entire subset of new requirements and expectations. And this is obviously taking some time to put together. While this is true, it's also pretty important to remind that the co-legislators, when drafting the legislation itself and in the Commission and the process, there was a knowledge that there would be this transition period. There was an acknowledgement that certain things would likely be delayed or they would take longer than expected. It's of course what happens when you put something into paper and then you go and try to apply it in real life. And basically, when we look at the legislation itself, we have several tools which have been provided to us in order to help avoid bottlenecks. First of all, we have the transition period. So at least from the Commission's knowledge and from what we hear from stakeholders, is that most manufacturers are currently and were focusing their efforts on getting directive certificates in order to benefit more from the transitional provisions / the grace period, as it's commonly known. While this is very much the case under the MDR, there are, of course, certain concerns under the Ivdr. As you know, there is a complete shift in the market. A lot of products which didn't formerly undergo notified body certification will now have to completely flip over, let's say. The margin is pretty large. And we're currently looking at what can be done. We're currently monitoring the market very closely with the notified bodies. We have bi-weekly calls with the notified body, with the NBMed and the NBCG now, which has been set up. So the notified body coordination group. We are continuously trying to see what issues we might face and what can be done from the perspective of, let's say, the Commission and the member states in order to alleviate any burdens. Of course, finally, it's important to underline that there's also a final tool which has been provided by both regulations, which is the concept of derogations. So obviously, when there is a public health need, and obviously when a product is not able to flip into the MDR or Ivdr, there's always the possibility for the manufacturer to directly get into contact with their national competent authority. And then if there is an EU-wide need, then this could be escalated to the MDCG for, let's say, discussions, and then eventually potentially taking an EU-wide derogation on these products.
Clear. But we have various delegated acts still be formalized and common specification. So what are their status at the moment?
Yeah. No, many thanks for that question as well. I think when we're talking about implementing acts and delegated acts, it's apparent from both legislation that the Commission has an increased role in comparison with the directives. So we have much more empowerment to take decisions or to initiate the procedures for implementing and delegated acts. While this is true, and when you look through the legislation itself, there are around 80 implementing or delegated acts which we are empowered to take. However, of those 80, only a subset is actually mandatory or obligatory by the date of application. And what we have endeavored to do is to create this kind of prioritization, because implementing acts are actually also pieces of legislation, and they do take time, and they undergo a heavy negotiation as well. Almost, I'm not going to say the same as the two regulations themselves, but they do take time in order to put together, to agree upon, to negotiate, and to finally seek agreement. So when you look at the Commission's website, we have what we call the Commission Rolling Plan, which is an extraction of these implementing acts which we are committed to deliver upon. And these are what we consider the mandatory and necessary implementing acts by the dates of applications, or potentially beyond that, just to see how the transition period works. A lot of the key implementing acts, let's say, for example, in regards to UDI, some of the recent ones in terms of, let's say, the single reprocessing of single-use devices. So that must be the most recent one that has been finally agreed upon and delivered upon. I think I would just refer you to that list. I wouldn't say look at the entire regulation and see that there are 80 implementing acts and that all of them need to be there. I would say mostly maybe refer to the Commission Rolling Plan, so you get a better picture of where we are, what is our estimated time of arrival, and a brief description of why this needs to be in place.
Okay, so I want to thank you for your answers. And welcome again to our Congress. And see you soon for another discussion about MDR and Commission proceeding about MDR and Ivdr. So thank you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.